Hello, everybody, and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
Welcome.
Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us today, and we hope you have enjoyed the conflict resolution series so far.
Yes.
And I think we finally finished with marriage.
Well, not our marriage.
I mean, we have more conflicts to solve?
Oh, well, conflicts are just a part of marriage.
Yes,
so
they are.
Resolving them is a good thing to do.
That
but we
is true.
have come to the end of all of our episodes dealing with conflict resolution in marriage.
Yes, we
and
have.
We're about to transition into parents and children.
And our producer shared with us yesterday, and shot me a text yesterday, that we had our largest listening download audience in the last month in this series. So
Wow.
Thank you guys for all listening and sharing it. And you know what? It's not conclusive. There's always more to learn about conflict resolution.
Yes.
And yet I know that it's something we all battle, something we all face. And to succeed makes a marriage really amazing. And yet to fail can destroy a marriage. And,
True.
And almost always does.
Yes.
Even if the marriage stays together, there's still unhappiness and bitterness and anger and resentment. But I've certainly enjoyed all the texts along the way or messages we received from you, our audience. And so please, if we can answer any questions or help you in any way there, please let us know.
Yes.
And so keep sharing it, liking it. And if you haven't subscribed, I hope you go to your favorite podcast listening app and subscribe. And we'd be very thankful for that. A couple of things to tell you about.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but thank you so much for all the downloads. That's just amazing.
Yeah, we are amazing.
You would tune in to our podcast, first of all, and then I'm just kind of humbled that people would seek help for conflict resolution. But we all know that everyone has conflict in marriage, so
Sure.
It's not a surprise.
And a couple of things just to tell you about. Bethany and I even were brainstorming this morning, thinking about the podcasts, and we're hoping soon to get started on putting together some Sunday school curriculum on how to communicate in a marriage, and even the conflict resolution series and a Sunday school curriculum and things of that sort. So pray with us about that. And if you have any ideas along that line, let us know that as well. Those are in the workings. And soon we hope to get started. We've kind of brainstormed already, but get started in writing a book about marriage. And so these are big days for us.
Yes, David has been talking about a book probably for years, and we just need to do it.
It's just that we're busy. Life is busy.
The days just go by, and we think, oh, well, we'll get to that later. And
That's
anyway,
what happens when you're raising kids and preaching revivals and doing podcasts, and life is just busy.
Yes.
But before we get into today's topic, changing gears on the conflict resolution, start aiming it towards our children, a couple of things. Bethany and I have really enjoyed our partnership and the sponsorship of MyPillow, and I hope you've checked their website out. We had never really heard of it until, we'd heard of it, but never really gotten anything from it until recently. And we really have appreciated their products and their stance, of course, politically, but also Christian.
Yes.
And so I hope you'll check that out. Go to mypillow.com, look that over. And do remember to use our promo code YOUNG. We also have a partnership, with Covenant Eyes, and we always are promoting that. Covenant Eyes is so important as the enemy's attacking our families and their purity.
Absolutely.
And the promo code there is actually DNB, stands for David and Bethlie, DNB Young. And so check that out as well. And then we want to just, I don't know how many times we've brought this up, but we still have some openings at the Couples Prayer Advance in October, Pigeon Forge. And do check that out. Consider coming to join us. It's going to be just a really great 3 days.
Yes.
Actually, 3 days, 2 nights. We'll start Thursday afternoon with Thursday night is a bonus day. And if you can join us for that, come. Otherwise, join us on Friday and Friday night, and Saturday morning will be packed full of great music, and, good teaching, fellowship, eating, and all of that. So do check it out. If you haven't checked it out, at least check it out and pray about coming to join us. We would love to have you.
Absolutely. We would love to see you.
And it's Tennessee, and it's football time, and it's fall, and what a good time to be in Tennessee.
Oh, what does football time have to do with going to a couples retreat?
Because I'm a Tennessee Vols fan.
There we go. Okay.
And it's just right there by Knoxville. So
okay.
What a deal.
Right. So we can all yell "Go Vols!"
Yes,
while
we could, or sing
pass
Rocky
Knoxville.
Top, or even go to the game if they're playing a home game that weekend, Saturday afternoon.
There we go.
All right, so let's get started. You ready to move right in? here?
Yes.
Conflict resolution part 2. We're going to talk about parents and children. And this is such a big one, and it actually is multifaceted. And so let's just tell them where we're headed, okay?
All right.
And so we're going to start with today we'll talk about some general Bible principles, not all of them, just to give you an idea of Bible principles. And then we'll talk about our toddlers, so parents and toddlers. And then next week, we'll talk about parents and children once they're beyond the toddler stage. And then probably the biggest area of conflict resolution is parents and teens. And so we're going to spend at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks about parents and teens. And then we're going to talk about parents and adult children. And then we're going to have a discussion about special situations, blended families, step dads and moms, and divorce situations where one parent is okay with one thing and the other parent is not.
Right.
And all of those are special situations, and all of those require very definite conflict resolution. Yes. So this is an important topic, and one of the topics that we always have to deal with as parents. And so let's just jump into the general Bible principles.
Alrighty.
And here's one that I almost always give. It just almost always shows up, and it's in the book of Proverbs: a soft answer turneth away wrath. And it's just absolutely a reminder there that our voice, the way we say it, we can be calm, we can be gentle, we can lower our voice. Our discussions can be calming, or our discussions in the latter part of that verse can be grievous. Yes. And it just stirs things up. And so really one of the things you have to do to master this art of conflict resolution is you have to learn to lower your voice, speak softly.
Yes.
And I love how simple that it is. So simple, and yet something we all struggle with.
Right. I've seen this in action as a young person. We had a family come to join our church. He was transferred into the area, and his wife became a teacher in our school. And I went to Christian school, and our teachers were amazing. They were wonderful, godly people. And so I don't want anyone to get the idea that they would rail at us or yell at us in our classroom at all. But, they would get stern with us from time to time. They would get frustrated with us. And I remember this teacher, her name is Mrs. Dalporto. They are now retired and living in North Carolina. But Mrs. Dalporto always got our attention, not because she would get harsh with us or frustrated. I just remember she would lower her voice, and she would talk very calmly, but very pointedly about what she wanted to happen. And I remember it made such an impact in my life. I thought every child in the room, their eyes would go straight to her, because you knew she was serious, but you also knew that she was doing it in love. And so as a mama, I haven't always fulfilled that, because yes, I do get frustrated with my kids. I have said things in a harsh way or in an unkind way. But that made such an impact on me, because I thought, as a mom, to really get a hold of my children and let them know that they need to listen to me. It's not the time to talk frustrated. It's not the time to be all stressed out. Like the moms you see in the grocery store, like, are you serious? Did you do that again? And all the crazy things you see out there. But it is the time to stop and allow the Lord to calm your heart, and then to speak softly to your child. It's just an amazing thing.
So as believers, really, we have to be on guard about frustrations, because when we handle conflicts with, from the position of frustration, that tends to escalate the conflict, because we raise our voice, we're irritated. Busyness probably is another part of that. Because in the busyness, and as we fail to, conflict resolution is an investment of time.
Yes.
And we just really don't want to take the time. It's a bother to us to have to solve a problem with our children.
We'd rather just yell a command and have them step to it. And then when they don't, we'd rather yell some more instead of stopping and taking care of it with a soft answer.
Instead of saying to them, it's easier to yell stop it than it is to say, let's talk about this. This is why that is wrong. This is what's going to be done about it.
Yes.
And so there has to be an answer, but it has to be a soft answer. Here's another verse in Proverbs, and this one is in chapter 18. He that answereth a matter before he hears it, it is a folly and shame unto him. And this is not so much with toddlers, because it's not a matter of necessarily discussing things with toddlers, but as our children begin to get older and they're preteens or they're teenagers, that's a really big one, because sometimes we jump in assuming this is what's going on here and I don't like it, I'm going to take care of it. and we blow everything up. But the Bible reminds us
Yes.
right here that listening to a full story, getting all the facts is essential to conflict resolution.
Yes.
And probably that would be a good verse to even back up for our marriage one, because sometimes in our conflicts in our marriage, we know what's going on. I know what's going on here, and I know why you did what you did, and we just jump right in without all the facts. And so listening. So he reminds us right here that I've got to hear a matter.
Yes.
And if I don't, it brings folly and shame.
Right.
And so that's such a powerful.
Well, that's another one that just takes some time, because we assume, being the adult in the matter, that we know exactly what happened with those children and whatever the problem is we're trying to fix. And so we don't want to take the time to get to the bottom of it. We just want to fix it right
Sure.
away. And that can cause just some hurt in your child's heart when they feel that things have been dealt unjustly to them throughout their childhood. And we will sit around the table with our adult children and they will all share stories about, remember that time that you got spanked for whatever and you didn't really do it, or, and they laugh about it now. So it does happen where something was misunderstood. But it should be our goal to at least understand the whole problem before we go ahead with any discussion or discipline.
Yes. So the general Bible principle starts with Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer. Proverbs 18:13, a full understanding.
Yes.
Seek to have a full understanding. But one of the things we learned in Proverbs was that clear directives are essential in conflict resolution. And one day, I actually had heard a preacher preach about it and then began examining it myself. And I was amazed, like in chapter 2, verse 1, Solomon says, "My son, if you will receive my words and hide my commandments with thee." In other words, there has to be words and commands before your son can receive them. And it's amazing how in these early chapters, in chapter 3, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments." And so what he's reminding us here is that we as parents have to have clear directives. Our son cannot remember a law that we haven't given.
True.
They can't keep a command. Their heart cannot wrap itself around a command that we haven't made clear.
Yes.
And he says, "Hear ye children," this is chapter 4, "the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding, for I give you good doctrine, forsake ye not my law." He speaks of his dad and says, "My dad taught me also and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words, keep my commandments, and live. Get wisdom, get understanding, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, she shall preserve thee. Love her, she shall keep thee." So what he's reminding us of right there is that it's true that a soft answer is essential, and it's true that clear understanding is essential, but it's also true that clear directives are essential.
Yes.
And as we get started here with the toddlers, that's where it all starts. With a toddler, your little one, you're beginning to give clear directives so that your child can listen to wisdom, can listen to what is expected, can understand where you're wanting them to go. And then at first, they don't have the ability to think it through.
Right.
They just have the ability to respond. And yet, sooner than later, in fact, very soon in a child's life, it's shocking how fast that children begin to think it through.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, what they're thinking through, they want to know, why. And a lot of times as parents, we find that frustrating. How dare you question me? But actually, God designed us to think. And so when our children and teens are thinking clearly, and one of the things we always point out is that, you hear it everywhere, teenagers are really fast to pick up on, insecurities or inconsistencies or whatever. And they'll pick up on that really fast and throw it at you. And although that has a negative side to it, if it's handled incorrectly, it is how God made us to think things through. Even faith is a matter of understanding. And so our faith is not blind. In Christianity, we don't blindly believe. God tells us in his words that we're to look for evidence so that our faith is reasonable and our faith is built on a clear understanding.
Right.
And he says that in Hebrews when he says that, faith is the substance and the evidence. And that's why he gives us creation so that we can look there and say there's a God. And we can ask, how do we know and why? And we can see the clear understanding. So it all starts in Proverbs with, as parents are giving our children wisdom. Chapter 5, "My son, attend to my wisdom and bow thine ear to my understanding. and it just goes on and on. He says in chapter 3, "Do this now, my son, and deliver thyself." So what's he doing? He's giving clear directives to his children.
Yes,
So
and that is a very important point. I think it's important. All of these are important to have a soft answer and to understand what's happening in the situation before you go through with any directives or discipline. But to have a clear, thought out plan of simple rules, if you want to call them that, for your children is vitally important, because not only will it frustrate your child if they think you have expectations of them that they have no idea what they're even supposed to do.
Right.
But it frustrates the parent because you in your heart know what you want them to do and they're not doing it. And so you, instead of treating them like a child who needs a directive, you're treating them like an adult who should already know this. And so you get frustrated and you're like, what's the matter with you? Why can't you figure this out? Why can't you just do it this way? Why can't you sit still in church? Why can't you sit up at the table and eat all of your food and not get any crumbs or mess on you?
Right.
Whatever. So you have to understand that they are children. They do need guidance, and it will help both of you not to be frustrated.
Absolutely. So let's jump in here and start talking about toddlers.
Okay.
Parents and toddlers. One of the things that's interesting is that our society continually sees escalating conflict issues with toddlers. And, we've even come up with terms to describe, the terrible twos.
Right.
And yet parents are so frustrated with children. And it is true that children come into your life and they really mess things up as far as they just stay and
Yes.
they're demanding and they take hours of time and an investment of time and money and energy and all of that.
Right.
But the thing about toddlers is that this is where it all starts. And I guess my first suggestion would be, moms and dads, if you're not careful, you fly by the seat of your britches, as they would say when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And rather than have a plan.
Right.
So if you're married and you have a toddler, you and your spouse ought to get together and say, what do we expect?
Right.
Are we okay with the toddler, screaming? Are we okay with the toddler throwing a fit? Mm-hmm. What do we want? Because until you know what you are wanting the toddler to do, how you're expecting the toddler to behave, you're not going to be able to resolve the conflicts. All you'll do is you'll be frustrated. You'll be irritated.
Right.
You'll throw up your hands in despair. You'll walk away and think, why did we have a child? But it starts with us as parents recognizing that this is what we want.
Yes.
And you've got to come to that consensus. Moms and dads, do all you can to get on the same page.
Yes.
A twofold cord has strength to it. So be on the same page with what you expect out of the toddler. And Dad, you be a leader in this, and you jump right in there and you say, well, what do you think, and how can we do this? And I would like for this to happen, and discuss it through. Mm-hmm. And remember that a marriage is a compilation of two different backgrounds.
True.
And so, chances are in your marriage, your parents, the wife's parents and the husband's parents probably handled conflicts differently and had different expectations. You can learn from both sets of parents, but as a new marriage, as a new family, you're responsible to find what works in your family to help your children to become mature, successful adults down the road.
Absolutely.
So here's where it starts, parents being on the same page.
I would insert here that you young parents, be very careful that you are biblical in your child rearing approach and philosophy. I would say that it's not a new cultural phenomenon that children are encouraged to display their Adamic nature all over the place.
Well, let me jump in there and say, it's not
Go
new.
ahead.
It's not new in the sense that it just happened, but it is new in the sense that it was like in the 1960s to where this became the norm of parenting.
Right. And I was going to say that it's not new that children are encouraged just to display their sinful nature and be whoever, they want to be. And it's called cute. But I would say that it is kind of a new thing that it is promoted so heavily and in our faces all the time because of television, social media, podcasts,
and education.
The
educational system will teach you that the Judeo-Christian way of raising children the traditional way is obsolete, old-fashioned, didn't work. So we've
Yes.
got to try this new educated way.
And so parents are encouraged to allow their toddler to display all kinds of behavior that is not really socially acceptable. And you think of it when they're this tiny as being cute. And, oh, aren't they just so sassy? Or aren't they just so fierce? Or aren't they just so independent? They just want to do their own thing. And what you don't understand is that 18-month-old, that 2-year-old, that 3-year-old will very quickly be an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old who is way out of control. And so please be very careful, young parents, that you are looking into the Word of God. The Bible does say that a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. Right. And so the Proverbs over and over, and even in the New Testament, it says you need to instruct your children. So we are just saying start early.
Start early. And remember that to fail here, to follow the principles of modern parenting, and to fail to train our children in biblical principles will result in your child being very self-focused.
Yes.
And they will grow up to be very entitled.
Yes.
And that will damage their marriage. It will damage the way they raise children. It will damage their relationship to employers, to employees, to bosses, to even the government.
Yes.
Our authorities. And so this is very important. So as a parent, there's 3 things here in conflict resolution with toddlers. And the first one is let's talk about just for a moment about why little ones can be unhappy.
Yes.
Sometimes it's practical. They're hungry or they're hurting.
Or they're tired.
And so there's very practical ways. But one of the big reasons that you'll find conflict with toddlers is that the toddler is lacking in its training.
Yes.
And so to solve conflict with a toddler, recognize that a lack of training results in an unhappy little one.
Yes.
So a toddler has to be trained to be happy. Mm-hmm. And if they are untrained, if they're left to express themselves, they will take toys from other children. They will be very self-focused, very serving.
Yes.
They will be very demanding. They will be very angry. They will show temper. Mm-hmm. The list is a mile long. So what we have to do as parents to actually win in conflict resolution with a toddler is we really have to force the issue at this stage. So we know why they're unhappy, and the key word to that is there really has to be a force issue involved. So with a toddler, you don't reason. You don't sit a toddler down and say, now I'm going to tell you why you cannot take Johnny's toys. That is not very nice. Because the toddler doesn't care at all about being nice. They want that toy.
Right.
So what you have to do as a parent at this age of life is there has to be a force element involved. In other words, you have to force the child not to touch a hot stove.
Right.
And you have to begin forcing the child. And the way you do that is it's called training. Mm-hmm. And you end up taking a child and you end up making the negative consequences of their negative behavior astronomical. And by that, I don't mean that we are never for any kind of abusive situation. That is not even on the radar here.
No.
But the point is, your child will have negative behavior.
Yes.
Everybody can agree with that. Mm-hmm. And what you do with it, if you celebrate the negative behavior, if you excuse the negative behavior, if you explain away the negative behavior,
right,
then you will fail as a parent. And the conflict will then grow and grow and grow, and your teen years are going to be absolutely World War III. But if you start with a toddler forcing the issue, and what you've got to do is, number one, you start with knowing what you expect,
right,
knowing that is not acceptable behavior. And the thinking is, well, they're only 2, so why does it matter? Well, the reason it matters is because it's easier to begin training them when they're 2 than to train them when they're 22.
Right.
And so you take a negative behavior and give it a negative consequence. And the Bible talks about speaking. You speak to your child a good, firm no.
Yes.
We believe, and we were raised to believe, and society traditionally believed, that a negative consequence might be a swat on a leg.
Right.
To where just a real quick, controlled, nobody's angry, nobody's being abusive, but a real quick, you may not behave that way. And it's amazing when you start reading about the society of today, will say, well, you can't spank a child because then you're teaching a child that it's okay to hit. But the fact of the matter is, every research that has ever been done on that proves that that's not true.
Right.
That is not true at all. And so you're forcing the issue. If you have a child that is screaming all the time, then you have to force the issue. If you have to just sit and hold the child and say, you may not move until you stop screaming. And is that going to be painful for the next hour? Yes. But once a child realizes that every time I scream, mom sits and absolutely holds me and I cannot get down and play, and I have to just absolutely submit to mom's control. That's using force to say to a child, you may not behave that way. And when we would have a child that is about to throw itself off of the diaper changing table because it will not sit still for a diaper change, to change your tone of voice to a definite no, and to give the child a quick little swat on a leg. There's no permanent damage there. In fact, not even a mark necessarily.
No, it's very controlled.
It's just a sting. And that little sting says, wait, my negative behavior here produced a very negative consequence.
Right.
And when a child begins to associate negative behavior with negative consequences, then a toddler, his conflict issues begin to be solved.
Right.
And there is something incredibly beautiful about having a toddler that is happy.
Yes.
And it has to be trained to be happy. What would you add to that as a mom who has raised 5 toddlers? And we got just a minute.
I would just say, just don't get frustrated, Mom. Have a plan. Sit down with your husband and make a plan and say, this is what is okay behavior and this is what is not okay behavior. And then be as consistent as you can be. And when your husband shows up, say, I need some reinforcement. And so let him take over, because I do know those little toddlers, they are so busy. They are busy.
Sure.
And there is a lot of training that needs to take place. But don't fall into the trap of posting those Instagram reels of, isn't she just the sassiest, fiercest thing you've ever seen? Isn't that so cute? Don't fall into that. Fall into the Word of God and
Absolutely.
say, I want to raise a very kind, controlled little person who's going to fall in love with God someday and want to follow the Lord Jesus, not somebody who's going to be rebellious against the Lord the rest of their
Absolutely.
days.
And I would add to that as we sign off today, when it comes to your toddlers, don't provoke them. Don't set up little scenarios and push them to see how they will react.
Oh, no.
Because what you're doing there is you're the one causing the misbehavior.
Yes.
And you're not to cause the misbehavior. You're to be training correct behavior.
Absolutely.
You do that lovingly, prayerfully, gently. And I would say one more thing as well. With toddlers, you have to deal with every negative infraction in the moment.
That's true.
Because their memory doesn't last.
No.
When it's a teenager, you can think it over for a day and then deal with it. You can think it over for a week and deal with it, because you can always bring it up and say, remember when you did this? Now we've got to talk about it.
Right.
But with a toddler, you cannot. So moms, if you got a little one and the little one is throwing a temper tantrum, there's massive conflict involved in that. And it's disrupting the normal order of life and a happy life. Then you do have to stop everything you're doing and you have to deal with it in the moment.
Yes.
Because give it another, if you wait 5 minutes, the child will not remember what happened.
True.
So conflict resolution involving toddlers is really just a matter of training and forcing the issue with negative consequences to negative behavior and starting them on this process. If you'll win here, the next step we'll talk about next week, parents and children, as they're getting older, it'll be a lot easier. All right,
Yes.
Any final word? And we're out of time.
I would just encourage you, just stick to it, mamas. Don't, and dads, don't allow this cultural philosophy or even just your tiredness, your frustration, whatever. Don't let it get you away from training those toddlers, because honestly, there is a sweetness to a toddler who can be told no and they obey.
Absolutely. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for listening today to the Keeping It Young podcast. Join us next week, and we're going to be talking about conflict resolution, parents, and children. Toddlers this week, children coming up soon on teens. So stay tuned and share, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Have a great day.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.